Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laurie Gagan, and I'm your host tonight on wellnesscrusaders.com with KMMU.org or Main Street Media Utah.org radio station. I'm joined tonight with one of my co-hosts, colleagues, and a dear friend, Patty Reese. We are going to be talking about the power of amino acids, but more importantly, we're going to be talking about an upcoming event that Christine Veselak is hosting. And I do believe Patty is going to be emceeing that. But we'll be talking about Feed the Recovering Brain Summit that's coming up next month. But before you get started, I'm just going to read a few disclaimers. The listeners understand that the role of a health coach is not to prescribe or assess micro or macronutrient levels, to provide healthcare, medical, or nutrition therapy services, or to diagnose, treat, or cure any disease, any condition, or other physical or mental ailments of the body. Rather, the coach is a mentor and a guide who has been trained and certified in holistic health coaching to help clients achieve a healthier lifestyle. We are not acting in the capacity of a doctor, a nutritionist, a psychologist, or any other licensed or registered professional. If the listener is under the care of any healthcare provider or currently using any prescription medicines, the client should discuss any dietary changes or potential dietary supplement use with their doctor. And the listener should never discontinue any medication without first consulting their doctor. So, Patty, I'm excited. You and I have not done a podcast in so long.
I know.
miss you and Jessica, and I miss Kathleen.
Yeah, I know life goes on, but we still try to show up. So I know I was just sitting here thinking, wow, I haven't seen you in a while, and also that we went to two the same schools together. Not at the same time.
Right.
We're both graduates for the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, and then we're gonna talk about today is the Academy for Addiction and Mental Health Nutrition. We both were our coaches from there as well too, and of course, your brain coaching is what you did with the Amen Clinic. So that's so wonderful, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So, you know what? Tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell our listeners a little bit about what you do.
Okay.
Especially your chefing.
The chefing.
Your chefing. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
and I'll be coming up, so I'm
Excited
gonna make some
coming
food for
out
you.
next weekend.
Yes.
So, anyway, tell us a little bit about
Okay.
you.
Well, I'm going to start with my tea because I had a little just kind of a slight bit of indigestion going on. So I was like, oh, I'm going to make my tea and then I'm going to bring it up and have it during the show. So this is a very simple digestive tea that is an Ayurvedic tea. So Ayurvedic is a system of food and eating and wellness. It kind of goes alongside, for people that don't know, it goes alongside yoga. It also parallels Chinese medicine. You can think of it as Ayurvedic medicine. And I love Ayurveda. I do that in my personal coaching. So I'm a wellness, nutrition, food coach, and a brain recovery coach too as well. But let me tell you more about the tea. So this is called CCFT. So that stands for cumin, coriander, and fennel seeds.
Oof.
Right. So we put that in a lot of our cooking, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which is great. We have cumin seeds and fennel seeds, two of my favorite, and then coriander as well. But you can make a tea from this. And the tea is so healing for the belly, whether it's indigestion or acid or upset stomach. So, and it usually works for everybody. Everybody's different nature and constitution. So it's equal amounts of each of those seeds, right? And then you steep it for about 10 minutes.
Do you add any sweetener, monk fruit?
Nope.
Yeah.
You don't need it. No, it's got, because fennel is kind of a sweet, cooling.
I love fennel.
Spice. I do too. It's one of my favorites. And then I've actually woken up at night. If I've woken up at night and I've had a little bit of heartburn, I don't get that a lot, but sometimes and I'll just drink a cup of this, and maybe even a half a cup of it. And it just calms down everything and brings it back into balance. So I'm going to have another sip
It sounds delicious.
and then put it down so I can talk.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get
Yeah.
started. I think it's important for our listeners to really understand, what amino acids are. You and I
Right.
both know in conventional modern medicine that root cause is not always the main subject when people go to their doctors.
Hmm.
And it just seems, and it probably because we're post COVID now, there was so much stuff that happened during COVID.
Yeah.
But it's one of the things that doctors rarely talk about, but it's one of the things that we know feeds the brain. So the
Hmm.
first question that I have for you,
Hmm.
I would like for you to share your thoughts on how amino acids affect brain function and mental health.
Okay. Well, I'd be happy to do that. Uh,
And Patty, real quick, before we get started, how long have you been a health coach in the amino acid nutrition world?
Okay, that's a great question. So I'm a certified health coach from the Institute of Integrative Nutrition that we both went to since 2020, since 2000. So 25 years. I became a certified recovery health coach and learned about amino acid therapy in 2014.
Okay.
So it was later on, and I honestly I we didn't talk about amino acids at the school, as you know. It wasn't part of. We learned a lot about many things about nutrition and anything that affects our health, right? But the amino acid part didn't come in for me until I was actually in recovery, and I found the book called The Mood Cure, which, by the way, oh my goodness, I just got a message from Julia. So it's the author is Julia Ross, for those of you who don't know, and my goodness, could it be her 50th anniversary, or is that too much?
Wow.
Of the Mood Cure. Um, so the Mood Cure came out in probably then, I guess, in the 90s, and it was all about about amino acid therapy. And Julia Ross is a psychologist from San Francisco. She runs her clinic out there, the Neuronutrient Clinic. And when I found the book, I didn't know about amino acids. I was like, the Mood Cure. Oh, cool. Well, I have anxiety and a little, just lingering depression. So I opened it up and I was like, whoa, this was a whole new arena for me. And it was like the missing piece because, when I read her book and then I went and did her training. So my initial training came from Julia Ross in 2006. I went out to California, and I'm living in Utah, and I did her training. And then from there, the academy started and the alliance started. A lot of us came together to take Julia's work and expand it. So the amino acids were quite revolutionary to me and to many others. And they're like, well, what is an amino acid? Well, we know amino acids are the building blocks of protein, but you can actually take the supplemental form to raise your different neurotransmitters. So we've been trained, and you as well, in targeted amino acid therapy. And basically that is looking at each of the major neurotransmitters: serotonin, the catecholamines, which is dopamine, adrenaline, norepinephrine. I can always not pronounce that very good.
You and me
Yeah.
both.
How do you say it? Norepinephrine.
Norepinephrine.
Yeah. GABA, and then the endorphins, right? Those are the four major neurotransmitters that we look at and we assess with the person with a symptom questionnaire. There's no testing. And even though people can go and get testing in their neurotransmitter levels, it's not as accurate, according to all the practitioners and research in clinical experience, than the assessment that we're trained in through the academy now.
And, I'll expand on that.
Yes.
Because there are some companies out there that I'm familiar with that I'm actually certified with. I rarely do neurotransmitter testing like via urine. And the reason why is about 95% of serotonin, which is your happy hormone, is
Mhm.
made in the gut. And
Right.
so in urine, when you're testing it, they can't really tell you that the metabolites are from the gut or from the brain. So it can sometimes steer false negative, false positives. I do think that in certain aspects, somebody is bipolar, maybe somebody's schizophrenia, and
Yeah.
you're working with the psychiatrist, maybe something like
Yeah.
that may be useful to them. But if you don't know where that serotonin is coming from, you can't really tell, is it from the brain? Is it from the brain? And just to kind of expand on one more, and then you can finish,
Yeah, no,
is
no.
for our listeners who are new to amino acids. So amino acids are precursors to protein. And what happens is that the protein that you're eating from foods, easier to do when you're eating meat, chicken, fish, harder to do if you're a vegetarian, and even harder to do when you're a vegan. But those protein foods then break down to amino acids so that they can be used in the body and the brain.
Mhm.
And those amino acids are precursors to, Patty mentioned dopamine. Well, what is dopamine? It's your focus, it's your ability to stay organized. And
Mhm.
so you need to feed your brain those amino acids. And there are so many things that disrupt the brain's ability to get those amino acids. One of them being glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. You know, all these herbicides and the pesticides that are killing the soil, to where the amino acids like tryptophan, which converts over to 5-HTP, which converts over to serotonin, your happy hormone. Those herbicides and pesticides are killing the biology in the soil. And so what do you do if you can't get it from foods? You're going to have to substitute, like
Yeah.
you said, Patty, to amino acids.
Yeah.
But go ahead and then and finish
Yeah.
that off.
Oh no, I think that's great, and thank you for bringing it up, because this is a discussion with both of us. The aminos. So what's really wonderful about looking at how to assess whether your neurotransmitters are low, like you said, there are some tests, and the urine test is probably the biggest one out there. But for us, most of us that are in the training, we are using a chart. It's an amino acid assessment chart, so you can look at people can look at their levels of the symptoms of low serotonin. So like you said, the happy hormone is serotonin. When we have enough of that, we're happy, we're flexible, which was my biggest one, because I'm prone to OCD and anxiety. So being flexible, when I'm flexible, I know my serotonin's doing okay. Because otherwise I'm like, well, that was not on the schedule.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. So there are just symptoms that everybody can relate to in some way, like, oh, anxiety, negative depression. It's a little bit different, negative depression. These are all low symptoms of serotonin. Panic attacks, um, um, insomnia, like that's a big one. And the lowest is suicide. I mean, this is a real important thing that we're talking about here, because suicide is very strong. And we lost a friend not too long ago from that, and I know he had no serotonin. There's just no question about that. I mean, there were other things going on in his life for sure. And then we can talk a little bit about why our neurotransmitters go off, right? That's part of the whole Feeding the Brain conference coming up. But these are all symptoms of low serotonin.
Right.
And
Right.
when that's happening, people can rate their symptoms on a scale from 1 to 10, and then the certified coach can go in and ask some more questions. So then we offer, either 5-HTP or tryptophan, but we also look at medications. So a trained coach will help people look at medications that they may be on that could
Right.
conflict with taking any of the aminos.
Right.
Um,
And
so
Patty, we did a podcast with Jessica,
yes,
and we kind of talked about all of the alternative medicines. I just want to take a few moments to talk about, because we see such a high uptick use right now in teens
yeah,
with marijuana,
mhm,
which is one of those alternatives. We see it in ketamine. We also see it in other, drugs, fentanyl, opiate type of
Mm.
drugs. But I think what ends up happening is our teenagers now are really stressed out. One, I think the pandemic probably led to some of that. Two, they're always connected to their electronics,
Yes,
which is kind of harming their dopamine, their ability to stay focused. And because they're always like in front of TV, in front of games, social media plays a big role in that. The Instagram and the TikTok and the Facebook, everybody's got to see what everybody is doing. And I know we know it ourselves, like as a coach, sometimes when we're out there comes a point where there's too much Instagramming. But what happens is it is draining these precious neurotransmitters that
absolutely.
parents don't know about. One, they don't know
Hmm.
they can get it from foods. Two, and
Hmm.
three, shame on the doctors who aren't educating the parents to talk about root cause. But
Absolutely.
getting back to the question on me asking you to share your thoughts on how these amino acids, now that we've discussed what
Okay.
amino acids are, how do they affect brain function and mental health, in your opinion?
Okay. So, well, I'm going to come. Yes, and we were just talking about serotonin, right? Some of the symptoms of serotonin. So, depending on where the person is on an assessment, those of us that are trained in amino acid therapy, targeted amino acid therapy, you can go in and then recommend an amino for that neurotransmitter. So it's targeted. So we just talked about serotonin, right? Anxiety, negative depression. And that's just like the negative depression is really like nothing's working out. You can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. There is no light. That can be because your brain has no serotonin. You can't find the light. Also, panic attacks are huge in low serotonin. And as I mentioned, insomnia and of course suicide. So 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 our recommendations would be to take a therapeutic dose of either tryptophan or 5-HTP if those are your symptoms. So if you move to the next one, so that's serotonin. If you move to dopamine, that is a different kind of depression, but it's still a depression, but it's a flat depression. It's apathy. You don't care anymore. And people that they have no life force. They have no motivation. They have no focus. Those are all symptoms of low dopamine. And what we recommend for that is also either L-tyrosine, which is a little stimulating, or L-phenylalanine. That's another tricky word. So those are both targeted aminos taken therapeutically to raise dopamine. And that is what we should be using instead of Adderall. I am so about the Adderall and
Right.
whatever new one they have out there
Well, it's
that,
addicting on top of it.
oh, it's addicting, and it's draining the adrenals and everything else in the body. It's just, so anyway, but if you take a targeted amino, which is coming from food, then you're able to actually turn on, create that dopamine. The brain starts going, oh, I'm getting it like from the food. I'm able to actually start creating it in my brain or my belly, as serotonin is mostly produced in the belly, as you said, in the intestines. So the body goes, oh, okay. Whereas a medication comes in and it's just a Band-Aid.
Right.
It's just a Band-Aid, and it might help initially, but then it's just a drain on the body because we need to get to the root cause of why people aren't having enough dopamine. They're on their phones. They're stimulating. They're coming down. But when you feed the brain aminos, aminos, but also really good food turned on, and all of a sudden fed. That's why our conference is called Feed the Recovering. We need to feed it with amino therapy and personalized clean food. I don't know if I answered that,
Right.
but
And
I think I did.
and I'm going to unpack something a little bit further for our listeners.
Okay.
So we're talking about serotonin.
Yes.
And we know as holistic health coaches, there's no such thing as taking a serotonin medication. It's 5-HTP, which is the precursor to the serotonin. But in SSRIs, and there's so many people that don't know this. So SSRIs, which are serotonin reuptake inhibitors, basically what it does is it blocks the serotonin that you have, holding it out in that little synapse,
Yep.
so that they think if they hold it in the synapse and then they reuptake it back to the cell, that that's going to help. But if you have a genetic defect where you're not making serotonin as is, or you have some type of a blockage in a genetic defect, whether it's you don't have MTFHR, you may have a bad glutathione gene, you may have that genetic serotonin, holding out in the synapse is not going to help you produce your more serotonin. It's just going to block it, reuptake it, and try to recycle it. However, what ends up happening is about 87% of all the people on SSRIs will say it doesn't work, but they don't know that there's
Could you
an
give me that
alternative.
percentage again?
87%.
That's insane.
It's insane. Those are the new stats that just came.
Oh,
But they
oh my goodness.
continue to take them because they don't know what else to do. And with
know.
taking big pharma medicines like serotonin, every big pharma medicine, when it comes to changing the chemistry in the brain, has a black box warning, may cause suicidal effects. But then conventional medicine doctors who don't know about amino acids, they don't have another option. So they start layering different types of medications on. Oh, you need Effexor because you can't concentrate. Oh, you can't sleep, so let me give you some tramadol. And before you know, they're caught up in this big pharma chemical ring where all they're doing is just basically given big pharmaceutical medicines instead of going back to really what Hippocrates says, which is what we're all about. Let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. There is a time that Western medicine comes into play.
Yes.
But when you're working with the brain, it's one of the things I love about Dr. Amen. He always says, first, do no harm. So just to break that down even further, but we'll go to the next question. Patty, unpack the layers besides serotonin, 5-HTP, of some of the more important amino acids that you think that are important for neurotransmitter productions. You talked about dopamine and GABA, but unpack that a little bit further.
Okay, good. So with the dopamine, the amino acids that really support dopamine production are L-tyrosine and L-phenylalanine. Those are two amino acids. One is a little more stimulating than the other, and that's what I was mentioning before about using that in place of Adderall, which is really what we should get into the college campuses because they're out of control with Adderall and studying. And listen,
oh my gosh,
I wish I had known about amino acids in college because I struggled and I struggled. I was also, well, I don't want to go into my stuff in college, but let me just say I struggled because I didn't have that brain support,
right?
So that's dopamine. And then GABA is actually a neurotransmitter that helps us feel relaxed. When we're low in GABA, we feel tense and stress in our bodies too. So it's a lot more in our bodies. We feel easily overwhelmed and we are just reacting to the stress response because we're just like, I am stressed. It's like this intense, right? So then we go to, wine or weed or tobacco or, the Xanax, I was actually talking about, L-theanine is my Xanax. So what are some of the aminos to support the GABA production of feeling relaxed? L-theanine. GABA, which is also, it's a neurotransmitter, but it's also an amino acid. So there are, and then there are different GABA combinations like taurine and theanine mixed in. And so you can.
Inositol is
inositol. Yes, I've been actually using inositol quite a bit lately, which is awesome because I learned it actually helps push the other amino acids into the brain more.
Yes,
I,
into the cell. You are correct on saying that.
okay, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, because I've been having good results with that too. Taurine, I'm just trying to think of the other. Anyway, there's combinations like GABA relaxer, True Calm, again, theanine. These are all to help support GABA.
And let me add to that while you're
Okay.
talking about that. So GABA is my favorite all time. I mean,
Yes.
I look at GABA as nature's Valium. And it's
Yes. Okay.
stressed
Yeah. There's
out,
an anti.
overwhelmed, overworked. So on with your neurotransmitters in your brain, 80%, and yes, I did say 80, the neurotransmitters excite your brain. They're known as excitatories. That means 80% of 100%, they're out there exciting the brain, lighting it up, putting it on fire. Only 20% of the neurotransmitters that you have in your brain calm and relax you. So if it's not balanced, maybe they're not eating, the right foods. Let's face it, when you're in college, you don't always think about eating healthy. It's often hard to find healthy places by campus because you usually find Chick-fil-A and Arby's and some of the other foods
Yeah.
like that.
With all
But
the
20% of the neurotransmitters you have in your brain calm you.
That's
And
a
when
really
there's
good
that
reminder.
disruption and the brain is excited, the brain is on fire, you have to do something to put the fire out.
Absolutely.
So the amino acids you were talking about, inositol, 5-HTP, GABA, taurine, those L-theanine, those are like what puts the fire out in the brain. So thank you for sharing that. Did you want to add anything to that question, or do you want to?
Well, I just wanted to talk a little bit about endorphins because that's the opiates
Oh,
of our
yeah,
brain. So those are and as we know, we have been in an opiate epidemic for a long, long time, and I feel like it's a very misunderstood neurotransmitter because the neurotransmitter that helps us deal with pain, both physical pain and emotional pain. So it's very connected to trauma. And of course we have a lot of trauma, right? Most, whether it's, from growing up or an accident or what's going on in the world, some people are super sensitive. So when we look at that particular neurotransmitter, our endorphins, when we have enough of it, we can deal with it's like physical and psychological pain relief. We actually are able to handle the stuff coming at us in the world. When we're low in our endorphins, we're extremely sensitive to the world. And some people more than others, we know that, right? Some
right,
people are just sensitive people, but they can also be low in their endorphins. So they can actually be sensitive to the world because their endorphins are out of balance. So everything is hitting them and they can't take it and they need to relieve that, right? And so most people go to heroin, not most people, but many go to heroin or wine or alcohol or sweets. It's
right.
not just the street drugs, um, um, or, Vicodin, other things like that that are going to help that. So it's also if you've been had trauma, as I mentioned, or you've had a chronic pain. I mean, chronic pain is really damaging, and it's used up all your endorphins. So all of a sudden that pain, and again, looking at the underlying cause, whether you have had a back injury or you've had a brain injury, those are our endorphins. And those neurotransmitters are what I understand, and you probably understand this more with your training, Laurie, but what I understand from Christina's training is they are the longest molecule. They need the most to rebalance.
That is
Right?
correct.
So that means if we're not getting in enough protein, and we also need the good fats and vegetables to make it work, right? So people are like, oh, I'll just take an amino and that'll be great. No, you still need food, friends, but we need more of that and so the aminos that work for your endorphins, We recommend total aminos, which is all of them, because again, we have to rebuild that longer endorphin molecule. And then also DPA, which is phenomenal for many people. We use that for people coming off of pain medication, people who have been in an accident, who have been
Patty, even like stuff, you broke your ankle, was it?
my foot.
Your foot.
Yeah,
And
last year.
you immediately reached out to Jessica and I, and we immediately went to DPA,
Yes.
diphenylalanine, which is
Yes.
the same thing I did when I just tore my medial meniscus. It wasn't like, what could I get as a painkiller? It was, what could I take that wasn't going to be disruptive to my immune system, but it would help
Mhm.
the process. So when you talk about that DPA,
Yep.
and you talk about the pain, but just talk a minute. What about grieving? Someone close passes away to somebody. Where does that diphenylalanine, where do the endorphins fit in on that?
Well, it's similar to breaking your foot or hurting your knee, right? The grief and the overload of the trauma of loss kind of it first of all, your brain releases your endorphins, so it doesn't feel as tough right away, maybe, right? And then everything starts dropping because you're in grief, you're in loss, you're in shock if it was an accident too, right? I've had accidents in my life. I mean, my sister was also dying of cancer. It was a slow death, but I want to tell you, DPA and total aminos and tryptophan saved me during my process with my sister. So if someone's had an accident or someone just lost someone, those aminos come in to support the brain. It doesn't mean you don't feel grief. It's just the body can handle it. The brain can handle it better with those amino support. It's not wiping you out where you've got to grab something. It's like, I
Right.
have to have a drink. I can't take it. Your brain's going, like you said, on fire in a sense, but it's a different kind of fire, right? It's a grieving fire that is almost unbearable for so many people when they've
Right.
been in loss. So, you know, the thing is to take that, to help people, guide people when they're feeling loss or grief with the aminos is so helpful because it allows them to really feel the grief without feeling like, they can't be around anymore. I mean, people have felt like that after a loss.
Right.
It's
Right.
just that unbearable
And
feeling.
for our listeners, I just want to put this out. I mean,
Okay.
even though we're holistic health coaches and we work in the amino acid nutrition and recovery, we also experience the life things that happen to us just
Yeah.
because it's human nature, like Patty mentioned about her foot. And when I tore my medial meniscus, like the next day I woke up and I was like in this victim mentality, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to I'm fortune telling the future, even though I don't know the future. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to not work out. I'm not gonna be able to stand. I'm not gonna be able to drive. Oh, woe is me. And I immediately said, I have to get DPA. I said, I'm not doing this. And what did I do? I texted you. I said, can you call me? And how much DPA can I take? And I tell you, Patty, 20 minutes after free forming that, and we're not telling our listeners what to do, but you can hire people like Patty to help you through this.
Mm-hmm.
Within 20 minutes, I went back to being my normal self where I didn't feel like I was a victim from an accident. I was like,
Yes.
oh, I'm going to get up. I'm going to go to physical therapy. I'm
Yeah.
going to go to
I'm going to read
chiropractor
more.
and yeah, I'm going to look at ozone. So, I mean, just because we're sitting here talking about it doesn't mean that those life issues don't happen to us. Yeah, we have children.
Absolutely.
We have those same life issues. I mean, we're normal just like everybody else, but the we look at the healing technique a little bit different because for us, we don't say, what does big pharma have? We say, what did Mother Nature provide for us to help us feel better? So
Right on. I love that, Laurie.
thank you for answering that. But
Yes.
offer me a fresh interpretation.
Okay.
of how amino acid supplements particularly help with focus. Maybe some clients that you're working with that, they're disorganized, they don't have ability to take focus, they're chasing butterflies. I often chase butterflies myself, so it's why I want to hear your perspective on it because I know what I do in the Dr. Amen world. But give me your fresh perspective. If somebody feels like they're disorganized. They got piles all over their house and they don't know where to start and their hands are down on their head.
Mm.
What do you offer?
Well, so the lack of focus is obviously that's part of the dopamine neurotransmitter. So as we're talking about the neurotransmitter way, right? What we're looking at that way. So I would recommend again either L-tyrosine or L-phenylalanine for that focus. But I would also bring in meals because a lot of people will skip a meal and not have focus because and that's part of it too, right? So you're not focused, you're not thinking maybe about, well, when have I eaten last, right? So that's an important element to bring in. And with some of my clients, I actually have them set a timer to take their aminos, especially people that are having trouble focusing with ADD. And, ADD is just a different kind of brain.
Oh, that's an awesome tool.
Yes. Timer for aminos and then another timer with different sounds. So they may connect the timer, a chime for their aminos and
I
then
like that.
a bell for their food. Oh, it's time to eat. And then they're reminded about it. But here's what's so cool. So as the aminos come in and the food come in, you start remembering more. You start focusing more. So the initial part is to get the aminos and the food in so you can focus. Because some natures are just that. They're chasing butterflies. They're in their head and they're thinking, and there's
Right.
nothing wrong with you. It's just part of your nature to be more, floaty and not thinking
Right.
about food.
Right.
So I really try to help people get in there and go, okay, I'm gonna make sure I take my aminos, and then I'm also going to make sure that I'm eating.
Okay. Okay. So in summary of that, what you're telling me, and I love the tool that you just talked about with the alarm,
Yeah.
is that you're feeding the brain every 4 hours because that's
Yes.
about the longevity of amino acids. And
Hmm.
then you're having your clients set a timer for a different sound when
Hmm.
it's time to eat and when it's time to take their amino acids.
Right.
That's a really good tool because I think when we put it in the back of our head, like, hey, I got to remember something, a couple hours later, we're like, what did I have to remember?
Yeah, I know.
So I really like that.
Yeah.
So you're also a holistic chef.
Yes.
So let's talk about how the food plays a role because I believe you have some online classes that you teach throughout the
Mhm.
well. So let's in that class, let's talk about the approach. What do you teach in those classes? What are your takeaways for listeners on something that you're talking about when it comes to specific foods?
Well, first of all, for the person that can't remember about eating, that's where the timer comes in. And then when they start eating regularly, then their brain comes on, and so they're able to remember more, right? So that's that. But in terms of food, we're all individuals. So I look at personalized food. I look at what proteins are best for you to digest, Lori. What proteins are best for me to digest. And I do look at the blood type. I think it's a baseline. A lot of people do allergy testing, but frankly, a lot of people can't afford to go do allergy testing. So
Right.
that's why I bring in the blood type, because it's an ancient system of how our body reacts to different foods. Just like animals don't eat the same thing. We don't
Right.
either. We don't
Right.
necessarily digest the same things. So that's really helpful. Some people are more geared toward paleo. Some can do okay with vegetarian, and maybe fish is their protein. So I look at that. I look at obviously their digestive system. But what's cool about when you personalize, when you get the food in, your body can turn into those cells, right? Those brain cells too. everything starts lighting up again. It's like, oh, you don't have stomach aches. You don't, you're able to absorb, your bowel movements are more regular. Your sleep is better. Everything starts flowing because you're feeding your cells, both in your stomach, in your skin, in your brain. Your
Right.
endorphin cells that we were talking about, those
Right.
neurons need to be fed. So by getting the food in that your body actually turns into the cells is really magical.
Right.
If that answered the question or not.
Yeah, no, it did. And before we go into the wrap up about you and we talk about Christina,
Yeah,
one of the things that I think most doctors don't talk about are bowel movements. And you mentioned that.
yeah.
So, I mean, we both coach. A lot of times when I'm talking to my clients, I'm like, well, how often are you having bowel movements? They're like, oh, none of my doctors have ever asked me that before. And they
Ah,
say, oh, maybe once a week. And I'm like, once a week, it should be like
what?
couple times. And so it's kind of crazy to me because, if we're not eliminating via urine, stool, and sweat, we aren't eliminating these toxins. And when our body is
Absolutely.
absorbing these toxins, it can make our brains misfire. It can make our brains a little bit more emotionally unbalanced than what it already is because these toxins aren't good for the body and they're really not designed to stay in the body. You know,
Absolutely.
they could even just like doctors should at least be talking about that and they can say, hey, listen, maybe you need to, drink more water. Maybe you need to add something to the water that so that
Enzymes.
you can drink it because you got to flush your systems in, toxins out. So, thank you for mentioning that. But before
Oh,
we
yeah.
go in and talk about Christina's, event coming up,
Okay.
tell our listeners how they can get a hold of you and what services you're able to provide for them.
Okay. Well, so it's my website's the easiest way to get me. It's pattyreese.com. It's PATIREISS.com. So that's the best way. And then on my website, I have a lot of different, um, I have a lot of my things listed. So I do coaching, one-on-one coaching. I do small group um, coaching as well too. And then I do classes. And I also do chefing. So if people want to hire me and my partner too, he's also a chef. I've trained him pretty well. We're starting to do that more too. Not that that's our biggest thing that we do, but I feel like I've given a few local talks and I always provide the food because if I'm talking about food and then people get to taste it, they're like, "Oh, actually, I can do this. This tastes pretty good." Because I think there's that myth, and you know this, Lori, of like, healthy, good food can't taste good. Well, that is not so.
Right,
So, and we are all chefs. If you're hard boiling an egg or making some toast, you're a chef. Now, what you put on that egg or your toast is a little different too, but this is part of uh, feeding the brain again, because when the brain is fed, um, you start coming, all your neurotransmitters start working, and you're like, whoa, this is good. I feel good. And this is what we're helping people with. Anxiety, depression, addiction are debilitating. And you do not have to be locked in that. And our food and how we live makes a huge difference.
that totally makes sense. So just to recap, pattyreese.com
Mhm.
is how they can okay,
PATIREISS. Mhm.
okay, is that's how they can get a hold of you. So
Yeah,
that's
they can
that's
just go to my
that's
website and
awesome.
they can just say hi, and I'll
Okay.
come back and say hello.
And if
I
they
offer
can't
a free
remember,
what's that?
I was gonna say, if they can't remember, they can send you an email at info@thewellnesscrusaders.com.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. And I offer people a 15-minute intro to see where they're at,
Oh, that's
because I don't
awesome.
yeah, I think it's important that people get to talk a little bit too about what's going on with them and that they
Right,
feel like, oh, okay. And then that if we're a fit, I may not be the one that can help them. Maybe you are or somebody else, right? Because I think it's
right.
important that I just don't take on everybody. I ask questions too. And and see if I'm the right fit or source them out. And that's part of a really ethical coach.
I like that. So let's go over. Tell me about
Okay.
Christine Veselak, who is actually the founder of our amino acid class where we got certified. Her
Yes,
upcoming event is in Ohio next month.
it
It's
is.
Feed the Recovering Brain Summit next month. And
Uh-huh.
one of the things that I'm most excited about is not all of us, including myself, you know that, we can't make the trip to Ohio, but you can watch it remotely. So
Yes.
fill us in on all
Okay.
of the goodies on that,
Well,
Patty.
I'm going to, and I'm actually going to just read a little bit from the website. So you can actually, we actually have a website called Feeding the Recovering Brain. And if people just Google that, it will pull up, the website for this conference. So welcome to the future of addiction recovery. So it's focused in addiction, but it's really focused on mental health as well too, because we know anybody that is suffering with an addiction, there is usually some mental health, whether anxiety, depression, OCD, eating disorder underneath that. So I'm going to read a little bit about it because I have it right here on
Great.
my phone.
Thank
Discover
you.
how feeding the brain with essential nutrients can unlock new pathways to healing and sustained recovery. As we've just been talking about, this is the conference. And we haven't put on a conference in a very long time. So we're very excited to bring people together. There's some amazing speakers. This summit brings together world-renowned experts, cutting-edge research, and actionable tools. I love that, actionable tools, to
Me too.
revolutionize addiction treatment through functional nutrition. Because as we know, this is the missing piece in so much of the mental health work out there and also addiction. They're not looking at the root causes that you talked about earlier, Laurie. It's essential we do that to help our people. Whether you're a therapist, a counselor, healthcare provider, or recovery professional, this event will empower you with innovative strategies to make a real impact. The summit is designed to bridge the gap in addiction treatment by focusing on the brain's nutritional needs. We will explore the science of brain health that you know well, and its role in recovery, amino acid therapy that we've been talking about, and biochemical nutritional balance, practical tools to reduce cravings and enhance cognitive function. So, and there's a whole list of all the speakers that are going to be there. Which I mean, Christine is one of them. Julia Ross is another one of them.
Wow.
There's just so many good speakers that are coming, and we're just really excited to come together. And again, if you can't make it in person, this is such a worthwhile conference to see what the new research is too. This isn't just, in our offices. This is the clinical research that's been going on that hasn't been in the mainstream media, but it's on
Right.
here.
Right. And is it a 1 or 2-day event?
It's a 2-day event.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so they can watch it remotely,
Mm-hmm.
which is great. So if you can't make that venture to Ohio, I think it's really important to really shout out there from the rooftops. Just like you said, if you
Yes.
are a counselor, a therapist, a
Mm-hmm.
psychologist, a psychiatrist who really is more allopathic medicine, meaning you really understand prescription medicine, but you don't understand amino acids, you don't understand the brain gut connection when it comes to feeding the brain.
Right.
It is a must listen to for every
Absolutely.
therapist because we all know that the truth is often, sequestered. You can't find it. You go out there to Dr. Google and you said, "Oh, I, got these sad symptoms. What do I do?" And what pops up? SSRIs. Well, we already
Right.
talked about SSRIs at 87%. They're not working, but you rarely find anything on feeding your brain amino acids and protein foods. So it's
Absolutely.
important that it gets out and that everybody that can be in who is working with the emotional brain be
No
on.
question. No question. And Laurie, we've talked about this before, but the fact is that it's not just big pharma, it's big food industry and big agriculture, right? And they have had a hold on our food system, and we're changing that. We're changing that by educating people on
We are.
where to eat, what to eat, and how to eat, and how important that is for yourself, for your mental health, for your physical health, and for your children and in our communities, and we're not supposed to be taking in aspartame and MSG. Those are neurotoxins, and they've been just dropped into our food. Oh, right, because it is what it is. And I don't want to get all fired up because I'm in a nice place right now, but the food industry has hijacked our food, and they do not care about your health.
Right.
And I am one of the advocates for clean, healthy food, as you are, and most of us are. And when people start eating that way, all of a sudden they're like, whoa, wait, I really like my life. My life can be okay.
Well, the inflammation is going down in their body, which means that the inflammation is going down in their brain.
Right.
Your body is less inflamed, you feel better.
I
So
know.
what's that website? Feeding?
Okay, so the website is Feeding the Recovering Brain.
Okay.
Yeah.
.com or .org?
And you can buy your tickets there. Yeah, buy your tickets there. Okay, here are the speakers. Christina Veselak, Hyla Cass. Ooh, one of my favorites. She's a nutritional claim natural MD. Michael Joseph Ferguson, who is going to be talking about ADD and adult ADD and how to work with it. Brilliant. Michael Lewis, MD, expert on nutritional interventions for brain health, particularly for the prevention and rehab of brain injury, which you're very familiar with in your work too, Laurie. Susie Kenny, let's see, Ancient Wisdom, Unlocking Your Body's Intelligence. Dave Kenny, Julia Ross, of course, is going to be there. Jolene Park. Oh, Matt Finch.
Oh, I love Matt Finch.
He is a recovery coach, a certified strategic intervention coach as well, too. Brilliant, beautiful man. Vasila Madhava, who is the benzo taper diet. She does a lot with helping people come off of benzos. An MD from New York. Dr. Michelle Perrin, she's going to be doing speaking to, I don't know what her topic is. And then, more. So it's going to be really fun. Yep.
Okay. And when you said Feeding the Recovery Brain, is it .com or .org?
I think it's .org.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. feedtherecoveringbrain.com. Feedtherecoveringbrain.com.
Great.
And
we'll
it's
put
a
it
website
out on our Facebook as well.
Okay, please. Yes. Okay.
Okay. So last words, Patty, as we wrap up.
I just encourage everybody to come back to self-care, to feeding their bodies and their brains. And that also feeds your spirit and your soul as well too. And share that with others who are suffering. We need to come back to the table and start eating again and caring for each other, and having meals together.
I love it. And words of advice to a parent that's struggling with their teenager, what would you say on that?
Words of advice for a parent. Sit with your child, feed your child, get them therapy, but also get them into a coach that's going to help them feed their brain, because a lot of the suffering is because their brains are not being fed the underlying cause, right? They're just running from thing to thing. They're on their phones. They're not eating real food. Please feed them real, clean food. Sit with them and eat. Sit with them and eat.
I love it. That's a great way to wrap up.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to see you next weekend.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, my friend, for doing the podcast with me today. And we'll see you real soon. And from the Wellness Crusaders, please visit feedingtherecoverybrain.com. And you can get a hold of Patty Reese at pattyreese.com. That is PATIREISS.com.
Right.
And we look forward to hearing from everyone. So thank you
Yes.
for now. Good night,
Blessings.
my
Thank
friend.
you. Good night.